Sunflower turns its enormous flower head to track the sun across the sky, but only while it's young. Once it matures, it stops moving altogether and locks permanently facing one direction, east. That single detail turns out to explain almost everything else interesting about how this plant survives, reproduces, and eventually became one of the most recognizable flowers on the planet. Its scientific name is Helianthus annuus, and it belongs to a genus of roughly 50 species, nearly all of them native to North America. Wild sunflowers still grow across a huge stretch of that continent, from the plains and prairies of the central United States down into northern Mexico, and some of their close relatives are remarkably specialized. One species survives only in active sand dunes along the California-Mexico border. Another grows exclusively in saline marshes in West Texas and New Mexico. Helianthus annuus itself is different. It's a generalist, thriving in disturbed ground, roadsides, and open prairie almost anywhere it can find full sun. If you're enjoying learning the real science and history behind the world's flowers, this is a good moment to subscribe to the Flower Encyclopedia. There's a lot more ahead in this one. What most people picture when they hear the word sunflower, a single towering stalk topped with one enormous golden head, is not really what the wild plant looks like. Wild Helianthus annuus is often a branching, multi-headed annual, considerably smaller and messier than its cultivated descendant. The tall, single-headed sunflower familiar from gardens and farm fields is largely the result of thousands of years of human selection, which brings us to one of the most interesting parts of this plant story. It isn't just a flower. It's one of the oldest crops domesticated on the North American continent. Archaeological evidence from sites in the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys shows that indigenous peoples in eastern North America were cultivating sunflowers with unusually large seeds by around 1200 to 900 BCE, and some researchers place the beginnings of domestication considerably earlier, roughly 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. Over many generations, farmers selected plants with fewer branches, larger flower heads, and dramatically bigger seeds. In some analyses, seed size increased by more than 1,000% compared to the wild ancestor. That is a striking transformation, and it places sunflower alongside squash and a small number of other native plants as one of North America's earliest domesticated crops, developed independently of the agricultural traditions of Mesoamerica or the Old World. Remarkably, sunflower cultivation may not have stopped in eastern North America. Archaeological and genetic evidence from the San Andres site in Tabasco, Mexico, has revealed domesticated sunflower remains dating to roughly 2,600 BCE, and the plant appears in Aztec stone carvings and in written accounts from the century after the Spanish conquest. Whether this represents an entirely separate, independent domestication in Mexico, or an early migration of the domesticated plants southward from North America, is still genuinely debated among researchers. Genetic studies published more recently point toward a single domestication event centered in the Great Plains region, with cultivated lineages nested among wild populations there. But the Mexican archaeological evidence remains difficult to fully reconcile with that picture, and this is a case where, honestly, the scientific community hasn't reached full agreement. What is well documented is what happened next. In Mexico, sunflowers became genuinely significant beyond agriculture. Historical and linguistic evidence links the plant to indigenous solar religion and to symbolism connected with warfare, and some researchers suggest its association with practices the Spanish considered troubling contributed to a decline in its cultivation after the conquest. In the 16th century, sunflower seeds crossed the Atlantic as part of the broader exchange of plants, animals, and ideas between the Americas and Europe following Spanish contact. Once in Europe, the plant was initially valued mostly as a curiosity and ornamental, an oddity from a new world with an oversized, sun-facing flower. Its transformation into a major agricultural crop came later, and from an unexpected direction: Russia, Russian growers, and eventually Scientific breeding programs in the and 1900s developed the oil-rich cultivars that form the ancestry of most sunflowers grown industrially today. Those improved Russian varieties were then reintroduced in North America in the mid-20th century, closing a genuinely strange loop. A plant domesticated by indigenous farmers in North America thousands of years earlier came back to its continental origin as a Russian refined oilseed crop, and it now underpins a global industry, producing tens of millions of tons of seed each year. But before any of that agricultural history, sunflower had to solve a basic engineering problem: how to build a flower head that could pack in as many seeds as possible. What looks like a single flower is not one flower at all. It's a composite structure called a capitulum, made up of hundreds or even thousands of individual small flowers called florets, packed onto a flattened disc. The showy yellow petals around the outside are actually individual ray florets, usually sterile, whose job is simply to make the whole structure more visible and attractive from a distance. The real reproductive activity happens in the center, where dense rings of small tubular disc florets mature outward from the middle over several days, producing pollen and eventually developing into individual seeds. The arrangement of those florets is where the plant becomes an accidental mathematician. Each new floret forms at an angle of very close to 137.5 degrees relative to the one before it, a value connected to what mathematicians call the golden ratio. Repeated over and over as the head develops, this angle produces two interlocking sets of spirals winding in opposite directions. And if you count them, the numbers you get are almost always neighboring values in the Fibonacci sequence. For example, 34 spirals turning one way and 55 turning the other. This isn't decoration. It's the most space-efficient way to pack a large number of circular objects into a roughly circular area without leaving gaps or overlaps. The same underlying pattern shows up in pine cones, in the scales of pineapples, and in various other plants that need to arrange many similar structures around a single growing point. In a sunflower, it means a head can fit dramatically more seeds than a less efficient arrangement ever could. Then there's the sun tracking itself, the behavior that gives the plant its name. Young sunflower plants really do follow the sun, called heliotropism. Facing east at dawn, slowly turn to follow the sun's arc through the day, and then reorienting overnight to face east again in time for the next sunrise. A study published in the journal Science in 2016 showed that this movement is driven by a circadian clock, an internal 24-hour timing system similar in principle to the one that governs sleep cycles in humans, controlling different rates of stem growth on the east-facing and west-facing sides of the plant. When researchers exposed young plants to artificial light cycles, the plants could track a roughly 24-hour cycle accurately, but lost the ability to track reliably once the artificial day was stretched closer to 30 hours, confirming that an internal clock, not just a simple response to light, was driving behavior. The same research explains why mature plants stop moving. As the plant nears the end of its growth, that circadian clock responds much more strongly to early morning light than to light later in the day, so the westward turning gradually weakens until the flower head settles into a fixed position, facing east permanently. And this isn't some evolutionary leftover with no purpose. The same study found that flower heads deliberately turn to face west attracted far fewer pollinating insects than heads left facing east. East-facing flowers warm up faster in the morning sun, and bees strongly prefer visiting warmer flowers, likely because the added heat helps the insects regulate their own body temperature more efficiently while foraging. In other words, the sunflower's fixed easterly gaze isn't really about following the sun anymore. It's a heating strategy built to make the flower more appealing to the insects it depends on for reproduction. And sunflowers depend on a great many of them. Unlike some more specialized flowers, Helianthus annuus attracts an unusually broad range of bee species, alongside various other insects, and research on its floral rewards has found that it offers both pollen and nectar. a genuinely valuable, if somewhat nutritionally uneven, resource for pollinators, particularly useful because sunflowers tend to bloom in mid to late summer, a period when many other flowering plants have already finished for the season, and food can otherwise become scarce. For bees, once pollination is successful, the disc flores mature into the seeds that make sunflowers such an important crop. And people are far from the only species interested in that harvest. In North America, sunflower seed is famously one of the most broadly attractive foods offered at backyard bird feeders, drawing everything from cardinals and chickadees to jays. American goldfinches in particular are strongly associated with sunflowers and their close relatives, feeding directly on ripening seed heads left standing in gardens and fields through late summer and autumn. It's a relationship that runs in both directions. The seeds provide a concentrated, high-fat food source heading into the colder months, and in the process, some seeds inevitably get scattered or cast away from the parent plant. There is one more scientific application of sunflower biology that has nothing to do with beauty, food, or pollinators, and everything to do with disaster response. Helianthus annuus turns out to be an unusually effective hyperaccumulator, a plant capable of drawing certain metals and radioactive isotopes out of soil and water and concentrating them in its tissue. This happens partly because radioactive cesium chemically resembles potassium, and radioactive strontium resembles calcium, two nutrients that the plant normally absorbs as a matter of course. Following the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster, sunflowers were planted specifically to help draw radioactive cesium and strontium out of contaminated ponds, and researchers reported real success extracting these isotopes from standing water. After the 2011 Fukushima disaster, sunflowers were planted again, this time targeting contaminated soil rather than water, and the results were far less encouraging. Soil chemistry in the affected areas caused the cesium to bind tightly to clay minerals, making it largely unavailable for the plant's roots to absorb, and researchers have also suggested that a less effective sunflower variety was used in that particular effort. It's a genuinely useful reminder that biology doesn't scale up simply because it worked once, and that the same plant can be a powerful tool in one set of conditions and nearly useless in another. Today, sunflower cultivation spans the globe, grown both as a major oilseed crop and in countless smaller gardens, purely for its size and color. As a wild species across its native North American range, Helianthus annuus remains common and widespread, and it has not been flagged as a species of conservation concern. Its abundance as a farmland and roadside plant across much of the continent reflects the species doing, if anything, extremely well for itself, even as some of its more specialized wild relatives face much narrower ranges and greater ecological pressure. There's something worth appreciating in the fact that this particular flower carries so many different kinds of significance at once. It's a monument to indigenous plant breeding going back 3,000 years or more. It's a case study in circadian biology borrowed from the same internal clock that governs human sleep. It's a demonstration of one of the most efficient packing solutions mathematics has ever described, built by a plant with no concept of geometry. And it's a tool scientists have actually deployed, with mixed results, against the aftermath of nuclear disaster. None of that requires any exaggeration. The sunflower doesn't need a mythology built around it to be extraordinary. It just needs someone to look closely enough at what it's actually doing. Thank you for watching this episode of the Flower Encyclopedia. Helianthus annuus, sunflower, the plant that spent 3,000 years being shaped by human hands, and still spends every morning of its life turning to face the light. One flower, one story. See you in the next episode.